was almost like someone bashed me over the head with a pot. It's paying the mortgage for my 3-bedroom house in London. Some people say that you need around $1 million or $2 million to retire comfortably. But one thing to remember is that that number is super arbitrary because it all depends on your personal situation. Do you have a lot of debt? Do you have a family? Are you aspirational in the way of life that you'd like to lead? It's all very self-dependent and what exactly you'd like to achieve when you're retired. I personally do not have $1 million, but I'm on my way to $1 million. I wouldn't say I'm retired just yet, but I was able to quit my 9-to-5 6-figure job a year and 9 months ago, and now I live off my investments. Human nature is such that we tend to get wiser in retrospect. There's so many things that we were told growing up that don't necessarily play out as we expect. There's a lot of information out there that might not be accurate for our personal circumstances, but we tend to latch onto it or have our beliefs anchored on that. I made a video about how I quit my job, and it was one of the best decisions I've ever made for my career because now I can live doing what I actually enjoy, which is still finance, investment banking, but I have a lot of time to be creative, to do a lot of things that I've always wanted to do. I'm running 2 businesses now. Someone asked me on that video, how did I do it? Did I have a plan? What sort of investments would I advise or maybe recommend if you are looking to quit your 9-to-5 and perhaps live off your investments? I'll share with you what I did and where I'm at, how it's going, and my plans for the future. In 2023, I have traveled to more places than I ever have throughout my working career. My job was very aggressive in terms of my travel schedule, so I had to travel twice a month intercontinentally, and it was very grueling, but it was always to the same region. This year alone, I've traveled to more places than I ever have because I've been afforded the freedom and flexibility to do so. I traveled to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, never done that before. Traveled to Bahrain, I traveled to the UAE. I'd been there before, but I was able to travel there to be on holiday. I traveled to Paris. I traveled to Mykonos in Greece, traveled to Norway. And if anyone had said to me 2 years ago that I would be able to travel and experience life and explore places without a 9-to-5 job, I would have said that was impossible. So if you are of that mindset, I totally understand. I was there as well. I was one of those people who would say, well, you're talking about $1 million. How on earth am I going to get there? But I found out I didn't need $1 million to take a break off work. If I can do it without this $1 million fund, so can you. Now, there's a group of people who are very happy in their jobs, and I really think that is the goal. You spend a lot of time at work, and so you deserve to be happy with your colleagues, with what you're doing for a living. You deserve to be well compensated. And there is another group of people for which that is a luxury, enjoying work, having great colleagues, being well compensated. They don't enjoy any of those privileges, unfortunately. So if you are one of those people who's thinking, I'd love to leave my 9-to-5 job at one point and maybe retire early or take some time out or work for myself, this video is for you. I was in my former employment for about 7 years, and I had a massive bout of depression and anxiety when I left. Not because I wasn't content with my decision, but it was more around the fact that I've been working straight for 7 years for the same company. I couldn't imagine a different life, even though I had planned for my taking some time off. So when I resigned from my job, my sister said to me, Jumoke, I know you well. You're a planner. I know whatever it is you've decided to do is 100% the right decision for you. But she said, well, what is the plan? And I literally said to her, I said, I'm taking off 6 months. I'm going to use the first 3 months to breathe, enjoy, live, travel, relax, eat, sleep, just rest, detox. And then I'm going to look at the next 3 months in terms of maybe looking for a new job or just trying to figure out what the next step for me is. Well, it's been a year and 9 months and I'm still on my lovely sabbatical and I'm living off my investments. So how did I actually build a portfolio of different investments that's able to fund my lifestyle now? The first thing you need to do is you need to have a plan. So I'm not one of those individuals who's confident enough to quit my job with no plan. For me, I'm a planner. I like things in a certain way. I like to know what I'm doing. Plan A, plan B, plan C. If you're anything like me, you understand. So I had a plan, and it took me about a year to get myself in a position where I knew precisely what that plan was. You need to understand what your expenses are versus what your income is. Now, I say this a lot in all my videos, but it is the crux of financial planning. If you want to retire early, you need to understand this. There's no other way around it. So what I did was I got a spreadsheet. What are my monthly outgoings? Things like my mortgage payment, my council tax payment. In London, we have to pay council tax, or in the UK actually, my TV license, all the way down to my grocery shopping, gas and electricity. I had an idea of everything that I was spending at that time, and I had been investing over a period of time. So I understood what my portfolio was bringing in. I'll talk about what investments I made later on. Now, the second thing you have to do is to make sure that your income covers your expenses. Otherwise, you will be in a shortfall every single month. The maths has to make sense. My income from investments was enough to cover my expenses. Where it wasn't enough, I plugged the gap. So I said to you, I had a year to plan. So I plugged the gap by saving even more than I was saving before, or investing from my income to make sure my returns were covering my future expenses. The next thing I did was to make sure that I had a stopgap or a safety net for 6 months. So I saved up 6 months of my income because I only planned to take a maximum of 6 months of work. And I'm one of those people who does not like to eat into my capital. I always like to spend my returns because, it just, I don't know, for me, I much prefer to spend my returns than touch my capital, because that really is what returns on itself, and it's kind of your foundation to fund your lifestyle. If you are thinking about resigning, it's a very, very scary process. It takes a lot of guts, it takes planning, it takes making sure that you are in the right place mentally, and it takes sometimes the support of those around you. And you might have families similar to mine where they're coming from a place of love, but they're also worried about you, worried about your well-being, they want you to flourish, and at some point the decision is yours. You're the only one who knows the reasons behind you wanting to do this, to retire early, to take out some time just to, be in yourself, enjoy your life, and then maybe at some point get back to work. So it's interesting because I remember when I was about to resign, I, of course, waited until my bonus was paid, investment banking. Personally, I would say wait until your bonuses are paid before you leave, because you've worked so hard for that entire year. And so it's money that you deserve. It's money you've earned. I think a week or two after, I said, you know what, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for a brilliant 7 years. I'm off. So I resigned after my bonus was paid, but I had a 3-month period to work through. And it wasn't painful at all because I had a brilliant relationship with my employer. It was just time to move on. Just before I handed in my notice, I kept stalling. I was thinking, am I sure about this? Even though I wanted to do it. Then I remember the video I watched a few years ago, produced by a guy called Prince EA, and he talked about how some of us are wasting our lives caused by anxiety, depression, stress in jobs that we don't enjoy. Well, that wasn't really the case for me, but really I thought about it and I thought, I don't want to be 50 years old or 60 or 70 or 80 looking back at my life thinking, why wasn't I bold enough to just take that plunge? If you never get on the other side, you'll never know what sort of opportunities are waiting for you. I'm rambling on a little bit because this is something that is very dear to me, and it took me a while to come to this place. And if you're in my position, or if you are where I was, I totally understand it. Now, someone had asked me about what investments I made. I've made some notes so I don't forget. The first thing is I invested in property. Now, I don't know if you know anything about London, but London is super expensive when it comes to real estate. So I got a flat, a 2-bedroom flat in the peripheral area, sort of like the outskirts of London. And my income from that flat, a 2-bed flat, is not only paying off its own mortgage, it's paying the mortgage for my 3-bedroom house in London. Property is very, very important in any portfolio. And if you look at the percentage of wealthy individuals across the world, you'll see that majority of them, or at least, a good percentage of them, have made their wealth through property. Now, if you're in a position where you feel that you are not financially buoyant enough to afford a property by yourself, you can always do it as a class. What I mean by that is that if you have a few friends or maybe family members who are interested in property and they're in the same position as you where they can't necessarily afford to do it by themselves, you can do this in a group. Everything, of course, has to be legal, has to be paperized, if that's a word. Basically, just make sure you've covered all the legals and you don't run into any sort of issues in the future. Percentage ownerships are very clear. Or you can set up a company, for example, and each one of you is a shareholder, whereby when you get in your rentals or your inflows, you all get to split your net profits according to ownership. So that's another way to get into the property market if you don't have enough finances to perhaps go in on your own. The second group of investments I made were in bonds. So essentially, bonds are sort of an IOU by companies. So if you have a brokerage account or a trading account, you can essentially buy equities, mutual funds, bonds, etc. There's a little bit of a calculation that goes into how much of the bond you actually get in terms of your notional value, but I don't want to get too complicated. This will all show up, by the way, on your trading screen. The bottom line is you can invest in bonds that can pay you up to 7% annually. And so at that time, I was able to invest in slightly riskier bonds that were paying around 10 to 12% annually. And the way I invested across the bonds is that at least every quarter I was getting quite a chunky amount in terms of my coupons. The thing I did was to invest in what we call dividend paying stocks. And it's exactly as the name says, they pay out dividends. So when a company has profit, it can choose to pay out some of that as dividends, and your dividend payout ratio would differ from company to company. But I made sure that I searched for companies that were healthy, that were sort of blue chip large companies, tend to have a very good schedule in terms of paying out dividends, and this really went a long way in supplementing my income. And as I mentioned before, to make sure I had a safety net and I didn't touch any of my capital, I actually saved up 6 months of my income as a safety net. Now I can almost hear you thinking, well, it's all very well and good, you saved up for now, what about the future? And sometimes I think we tend to discount the power of time, and this is the kicker. This last point is really what makes me think that I can actually retire at this point in my life and be okay. When I was working for my employers, I was essentially selling my skill set, as you do. When you work for an employer, you're selling your time, your skill set, and in turn they pay you for that. Your employer is a business, so they must be making more from you than they're actually paying you. So here's a mathematical example. I was selling my skill set, my time, my efforts, my know-how, my intelligence, all of that to my employer for £100. Now they were making £100 from my skill set, but they were paying me around 15%, if I'm lucky, 20%, being remunerated a fraction of that. And so I thought to myself, well, if I have this skill set and I'm operating under an employer, surely this skill set is transferable and I can work for myself. And this essentially is the final point. Make use of your skill set now so that you are building and compounding on your income as time goes on. And that's what I mean when I say the power of time. We tend to neglect that. And the truth is, if you are good at what you do, money will always find you. That's something I was not aware of. And I know for some people that's very scary. The other day I had my gas engineer come around and he said to me, I've been working for one of the biggest and best electrical companies in the country for about 14 years. And the one thing that I was scared of when I went independent 3 years ago was that, what if nobody ever comes? That's the fear that people have. So there might be someone right now who's watching me and thinking, if I was to go independent, will anyone ever come? Well, it does take effort, but all the businesses that are successful today, they all started from somewhere. So one client is all you need, and then the second client, and then the next client. It was one of the best decisions I've ever made. I have time now to travel. I've got time to also run a retail business, which I fantastically love. It's a passion project, but I'm also using my investment banking skill set to earn money. Being free allowed me consult for a company, and I was working 8 days a month. For those 8 days, I was earning 100% of what I earned in a month. So my point being that being independent and being able to plan towards taking some time off work, which turned out to be a longer sabbatical, it's opened up and allowed me explore different things, allowed me explore different opportunities. As your portfolio is working for you, use your skill sets to build your capital so that if you are working towards retirement over time, your capital base keeps getting larger and larger the more you earn. I had to start from somewhere as well. I started small. When I started my career, I was on a decent salary, but I was spending even more than I was earning. But one day I sat and I said, hang on, it was almost like someone bashed me over the head with a pot. And I thought, I'm making so much money for my employer and my clients, and yet I live paycheck to paycheck. Now something has to be done. And that was the moment I decided to change my life and start investing, looking after myself, looking after my future. And you can do exactly the same. Now, if you are someone who perhaps has 2 incomes in their household, even better, right? You've got someone saying, lean on me, which is a good thing because one of your incomes can be used to fund your lifestyle and the other income could be used strictly towards investment. The decision as to how much you invest, how much you save, how much you spend, it all comes down to you. You only are aware of your personal circumstances and nobody else. I want to leave you with one thought. When you start to see the income you could potentially earn if you were just a little bit more intentional about getting your finances in a good place, I promise you, you won't regret it, and you'll be happy you did. Now, I want to leave you with a quote which I love from Confucius, and this really went a long way in changing my mindset. The man who thinks he can and the man who thinks he can't are both right.